The morning sun filtered through the dense canopy as Tom Reed adjusted his wide-brimmed hat and swatted away a persistent mosquito. 6 days into his environmental survey of the Amazon tributaries, and the humidity still felt like a wet blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Tom wasn't complaining, though. At 42, after years behind university desks, these field expeditions were what kept his passion for environmental science alive. "Drone battery at 70%, called out Luis, his local guide and research assistant. "Want to check that bend in the river we spotted on yesterday's satellite images?" Tom nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Let's do it." The water samples there might show different pollution levels from the mining operations upstream. Their small research boat puttered along the brown waters, equipment cases strapped down and covered with tarps to protect against the occasional rain shower that could appear without warning. The research station was a 3-hour journey downriver, and they had packed enough supplies to last until sunset. Luis launched the drone, its small motors whirring to life as it ascended above the tree line. Tom watched the live feed on his tablet, making notes about the river's flow patterns and the thickness of vegetation along the banks. This section of the Amazon basin remained relatively untouched, which made it perfect for establishing baseline data for his environmental impact study. "Wait, go back," Tom said suddenly, his eyes narrowing at something on the screen. "Did you see that?" Luis adjusted the drone's flight path, bringing it around in a wide arc. "See what? Another illegal clearing?" "No, something bigger." Tom's voice trailed off as the drone's camera panned across what initially looked like a large rock formation, partially hidden by the jungle canopy. But rocks didn't have perfectly straight edges or what appeared to be rows of windows. "That can't be right," Luis whispered, leaning over Tom's shoulder to get a better view of the tablet. Tom zoomed in, the image pixelating briefly before sharpening again. "Can you get the drone closer?" The small aircraft dipped lower, weaving through a gap in the trees. What came into view next made both men fall silent. The unmistakable bow of a cruise ship, enormous and gleaming white despite being partially covered in vines, jutted out from a hidden inlet. The ship's name, Aurora Star, was still visible in elegant blue lettering. "This is impossible," Tom said, his scientific mind racing to find an explanation. "We're at least 100 miles from the ocean. The river isn't deep enough for a vessel that size." "Not even close." Luis shook his head in disbelief. "Could it be some kind of movie set?" "Too detailed," Tom replied, directing the drone to circle the ship. "And too big. Look at the scale compared to those trees. That's a real cruise liner at least 10 decks high." The drone's battery warning flashed, and Luis reluctantly brought it back to their boat. Both men sat in stunned silence for several minutes, replaying the footage and examining it frame by frame. "We need to report this," Tom finally said, reaching for his satellite phone. The call to the Brazilian Environmental Authority was brief and met with obvious skepticism. "They think we're confused or playing a prank," Tom told Luis after hanging up. "They said cruise ships don't end up in tributaries of the Amazon." Luis raised an eyebrow. "No kidding." Tom stared at the direction of their discovery, barely visible now that they were back on the river. "We need to get closer. Now? We don't have the right equipment to explore something like that," Luis protested. "Just to confirm what we saw," Tom insisted. "We'll take photos from the shore, document the location properly, then head back to the research station to organize a proper expedition." Luis reluctantly steered their boat toward the coordinates marked on their GPS. As they approached, the foliage grew thicker, forming a natural barrier that would have made the ship invisible from the main river channel. It took them nearly 40 minutes of careful navigation through increasingly narrow waterways before they found a small clearing where they could dock their boat. The massive hull of the cruise ship towered above them, casting a shadow over the small beach area where they stood. "Aurora Star," Tom read aloud, neck craned back to take in the enormity of the vessel. "I remember this ship from the news a few years ago. It went missing during a Caribbean cruise in 2022. Over 2,000 passengers and crew. They found some lifeboats, but most people were never recovered. And now it's here." Luis gestured at the surrounding jungle. "How is that physically possible?" Tom shook his head, taking photos with his camera. "It's not. At least not by any means I can explain. The draft of a ship this size is around 30 feet. This river is barely 15 feet deep at its center. As they circled the visible portion of the ship, Tom noticed something else that defied explanation. There was no damage to the hull, no scrapes, no dents, no signs that it had run aground or been dragged into position. It looked as if it had been gently placed there, like a toy in a bathtub. "Look at this," Louise called, pointing to a section of the hull where the jungle had been cleared away. A makeshift dock had been constructed leading to a service door that hung slightly open. "Someone's been here," Tom said quietly, zooming in with his camera. "Recently, too. Those cut vines haven't had time to grow back." The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees. They had maybe 2 hours of daylight left, not nearly enough time to safely explore the ship and make it back to the research station before dark. "We should go," Louise said, glancing nervously at the darkening jungle. "Navigation on the river is dangerous after sunset." Tom nodded reluctantly. "You're right, but we're coming back. Tomorrow, with more people and proper equipment." That night at the research station, Tom couldn't sleep. He pored over maps of the region, trying to find any logical explanation for how a 70,000-ton cruise ship could end up in a tributary barely deep or wide enough for their research boat. He checked the news archives, confirming the details of the Aurora Star's disappearance 3 years earlier. The official report stated the ship had last made contact near the Bahamas before all communication ceased. A massive search operation found 3 lifeboats and some debris, but no sign of the main vessel. Theories ranged from a catastrophic sinking to hijacking, but no conclusive evidence was ever found. And now, somehow, the ship had appeared in one of the most remote regions of the Amazon rainforest. By morning, Tom had assembled a small team himself, Louise, 2 other researchers from the station, and a local guide familiar with the area. They packed more extensive equipment this time: climbing gear, flashlights, first aid supplies, and enough food and water for a full day of exploration. The return journey seemed to take longer, anxiety building with each mile. Tom wondered briefly if they would arrive only to find nothing there. The previous day's discovery, some kind of shared hallucination, brought on by heat and exhaustion. But as they rounded the final bend, the massive white hull came into view once again, even more imposing in the morning light. "I still can't believe it," whispered one of the other researchers, a geologist named Chen who had initially thought Tom's story was an elaborate joke. They docked at the same small beach, securing their boat carefully before approaching the makeshift dock they'd spotted the day before. "We stay together," Tom instructed as they stood before the open service door. "No one wanders off alone. We document everything, but touch nothing unless absolutely necessary." With flashlights in hand, they stepped across the threshold into the silent, darkened interior of the Aurora Star, none of them prepared for what they would find inside. The service door creaked as it swung open wider, revealing a dim corridor that smelled of stale air and something else, a faint chemical scent that Tom couldn't quite place. Their flashlight beams cut through the darkness, illuminating dust particles floating lazily in the air. "The power's out," Chen whispered, though there was no real need to keep quiet. The emptiness of the massive ship seemed to demand silence all the same. "Maybe not everywhere," Louise said, pointing to a small red light blinking on a security camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling. "Something's still running." Tom felt a chill despite the humid air. "Let's find the main deck. We need to get our bearings." They moved cautiously through the narrow service corridors, following emergency exit signs that occasionally caught the light from their flashlights. The ship felt unnaturally still, the only sounds being their footsteps and the distant creaking of metal adjusting to the heat of the day. After climbing 3 flights of stairs, they emerged into what appeared to be a main hallway lined with cabin doors. Unlike the service area, this part of the ship showed clear signs of human presence and hasty departure. "Look at this," Tom said, pushing open a cabin door that was already slightly ajar. Inside, the scene was frozen in time. A suitcase lay open on the bed, clothes scattered around as if someone had quickly grabbed only the essentials. A paperback novel rested on the nightstand, a bookmark still in place about halfway through. On the small desk, a half-finished letter sat next to a pen that had rolled to the edge. Chen picked up a framed photograph from the desk. "Family vacation turned nightmare," he murmured, looking at the smiling faces of a couple with 2 young children, the ship's deck visible in the background. "Every cabin might tell a similar story," Tom said, "but we need to focus. Let's find the bridge. That's where we'll get the most information. As they continued through the passenger areas, the evidence of sudden evacuation became more pronounced. The grand atrium, once the centerpiece of the luxury liner, now stood in eerie silence. Tables in the adjacent restaurant still held plates with the petrified remains of meals. Some had turned to dust, while others were preserved under layers of mold. A chess game sat unfinished in the lounge, and scattered playing cards covered the floor near the casino entrance. "I don't understand," Louis said, examining a row of emptied safety deposit boxes behind the purser's desk. "If this was a robbery or a hijacking, why bring the ship here? And how? And why leave so much behind?" added Rivera, the fourth member of their team who had remained quiet until now. He pointed to a jewelry box that had fallen open, revealing several expensive-looking necklaces. "Thieves wouldn't leave this." They found their way to a central staircase that led to the upper decks. As they climbed, Tom noticed something odd about the emergency systems. "The ship's evacuation plan," he said, pointing to a diagram on the wall. "Look at the lifeboat stations." The others gathered around, shining their lights on the schematic. "According to this, there should be 16 lifeboats, 8 on each side," Chen observed. "Let's see what's actually left," Tom suggested. When they reached the lifeboat deck, the mystery deepened. Every single lifeboat was missing, the davits that once held them now empty and rusting slightly in the tropical climate. But there was no sign of panic or chaos, no broken railings, no scattered life vests, just the methodical absence of every escape craft. "They didn't abandon ship in a storm or after a collision," Tom said, running his hand along one of the empty davits. "This was organized." "They took their time, but why?" Rivera asked. "And where did they go?" "We're surrounded by jungle." Tom shook his head. "Let's find the bridge. Maybe the captain's log or the ship's computers can tell us something." The bridge was located on the highest deck, offering what would have been a commanding view of the ocean, now replaced by a sea of green treetops stretching to the horizon. Unlike the rest of the ship, the door to the bridge was locked. "Stand back," Rivera said, removing a small pry bar from his backpack. With a few careful movements, he managed to force the door open without causing much damage. The captain's domain was unusually well preserved, almost as if it had been prepared for inspection. Charts were neatly rolled in their holders. The captain's logbook was centered precisely on the main console, and all equipment was powered down in an orderly fashion. Tom went straight for the logbook, opening it carefully. The final entry was dated July 17, 2022, 3 days after the ship had been reported missing. "This doesn't make sense," he said, reading aloud. "All passengers and crew safely evacuated as per Protocol Omega. Ship secured and systems configured for extended dormancy. May God forgive what we've done." "Protocol Omega?" Luis asked. "What's that?" "There's no such standard maritime protocol," Tom replied, flipping through earlier pages. "And look at this. There's no mention of any emergency, no mayday call, nothing to indicate why they would abandon ship." Chen had been examining the ship's main control panel. "Some of these systems are still drawing power," he reported. "But from where?" "The main engines are cold." Tom joined him at the console, noticing a set of switches labeled differently from the others. "These aren't standard ship systems," he said, pointing to labels that read containment field and specimen monitoring. "What kind of cruise ship has containment fields?" Rivera asked, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Not a normal one," Tom replied. He flipped one of the switches experimentally. Immediately, a soft hum filled the bridge as auxiliary lighting came to life. Screens flickered on around the room, displaying status reports and security camera feeds from throughout the ship. "It's got backup power," Luis said. "But how?" "After 3 years?" Tom pointed to one of the monitors showing the upper deck. "Solar panels. Look, they're installed all over the top deck. But those weren't part of the original ship design. I've seen photos of the Aurora Star and cruise advertisements. So someone modified the ship after it disappeared," Chen reasoned. "Added power systems to keep something running." "The question is what?" Tom said, scanning through the security feeds. Most showed empty corridors and abandoned rooms, but one feed caught his attention, a door labeled "Authorized Personnel Only" deep in the lower decks. "That's where we need to go next," Tom said, pointing to the screen. As they made their way down through the ship, Tom noticed something else strange. Every few corridors, they would pass a room that had been completely emptied, not just of valuables or personal items, but of everything, down to the furniture and fixtures. These spaces stood in stark contrast to the cabins where it seemed people had left in a hurry, but taken only necessities. It's like they were removing all trace of something specific, Rivera observed as they passed another stripped room. They reached the lower decks where the engines and maintenance areas were located. Following the signs and comparing them to the security feed they'd seen, they eventually stood before the door marked, "Authorized personnel only." Unlike the bridge, this door wasn't just locked, it was reinforced with additional steel bars and what appeared to be a biometric scanner. "We're not getting through this without serious equipment," Rivera said after examining it. Tom nodded, taking photos of the door and its security measures. "We'll need to come back better prepared. But first, let's check the engine room. I want to know if there's any clue about how this ship moved upriver." The engine room was vast, a cathedral of machinery now silent and still. Tom had expected to find damage, engines modified for river travel or signs of how the ship had been transported. Instead, everything was intact and, more surprisingly, immaculately maintained. "These engines haven't run in years, but someone cleaned and preserved them," Chen said, running a finger along a fuel line that showed no dust or corrosion. "They were prepared for long-term storage." "Just like the bridge," Tom agreed. "The abandonment was planned, not forced." As they completed their circuit of the engine room, Luis called them over to a small office in the corner. Inside, they found the chief engineer's desk with a logbook similar to the captain's. Tom read the final entry. "All systems shut down as ordered. Ballast reconfigured according to specifications. The modifications held during transport, but I maintain my objection to this location. River depth is insufficient for long-term viability. Note: all technical data regarding Project Abyssal has been purged from ship's computers as per Protocol Omega." The team exchanged glances. "Project Abyssal?" Rivera echoed. "Sounds like something from a spy movie. And transport," Tom added. "Like the ship was deliberately moved here." "But that's impossible," Chen insisted. "No method exists to transport a cruise ship intact through a jungle." As the afternoon wore on, they documented everything they could, taking hundreds of photos and collecting small samples where appropriate. The mystery only deepened with each new area they explored. A ship perfectly preserved yet deliberately abandoned, modified for an unknown purpose, and transported to a location where it couldn't possibly have sailed under its own power. As the light began to fade outside, Tom made the decision to head back to the research station. "We need more people, better equipment, and official authorization," he told the team. Whatever's behind that reinforced door might be the key to this whole mystery. On their way out, Tom noticed something they'd missed on their way in. A small plaque beside the service entrance that hadn't been there in any of the original ship photos he'd seen. The metal was new, untarnished by the elements, and the message was simple but chilling. "What sleeps below must remain below. We were wrong to wake it." 3 days passed before Tom could return to the Aurora Star. This time, he wasn't leading a small group of curious researchers, but an official expedition. His findings had finally convinced the authorities that something truly extraordinary was happening in this remote stretch of the Amazon. The team now included Dr. Patricia Wilson, a naval engineer, Officer Ramirez from the Brazilian Federal Police, Dr. Hancock, a forensic specialist, and a tech expert named Quan, who specialized in retrieving data from damaged systems. They brought proper equipment: portable generators, cutting tools, communication devices, and climbing gear. "Remember, we document everything," Tom instructed as their larger boat approached the makeshift dock. "Nothing leaves the ship without being photographed in place first." Officer Ramirez nodded, his hand resting casually on his holstered sidearm. "And we stay together. If anyone finds something significant, radio the whole team." The ship looked different in the morning light, less ominous but more out of place. Vines had started to claim more of the white hull, nature's slow attempt to hide the impossibility of a cruise ship in the jungle. "I still can't believe it," Dr. Wilson murmured as she stepped onto the dock. "I reviewed the satellite imagery from the past 5 years. This ship appeared literally overnight 3 years ago. One day nothing, the next day a cruise liner." "That's impossible," Quan said. So is a ship this size navigating the Amazon tributaries, she replied. Yet here we are. They entered through the same service door, but this time they came prepared. Portable lights illuminated the corridors as they made their way directly to the bridge. Tom had a theory he wanted to test. On the bridge, Quan went straight to the ship's computer systems while Dr. Wilson examined the navigation equipment. These solar panels were professionally installed, she reported, looking at detailed schematics on one of the screens. This wasn't a rush job. Someone carefully planned for this ship to maintain power indefinitely. Quan nodded as his fingers flew across a keyboard. And they wanted to keep the surveillance system running. Look at this. He pulled up a security menu on the main screen. The ship had over 300 cameras throughout its decks, and remarkably, most still functioned. Can you access archived footage? Tom asked, leaning over Quan's shoulder. Already on it, he replied. The system has been recording continuously for... He paused, eyes widening. 3 years and 2 months, almost since the disappearance. That's hundreds of thousands of hours of footage, Dr. Hancock said. We'll need to be strategic. Tom pointed to the calendar on the screen. Let's start with the last day in the captain's log, July 17th, 2022. Quan nodded, entering commands to retrieve the footage. Which cameras? Main areas first. The atrium, restaurants, deck, bridge. The main screen divided into 4 sections, each showing a different part of the ship on that fateful day. What they saw left everyone speechless. The ship was fully operational, passengers dining and socializing normally. Nothing indicated they were on a vessel that had officially been declared missing 3 days earlier. No panic, no emergency situations, nothing unusual at all, until exactly 14:37. At that precise moment, every single person on camera stopped what they were doing. A woman froze with a fork halfway to her mouth. A bartender stood motionless while pouring a drink. A child paused mid-stride on the deck. What happened? System glitch? Officer Ramirez asked. Quan shook his head. No. Look. He pointed as the footage continued. After about 10 seconds of complete stillness, everyone simultaneously resumed movement, but not their previous activities. Instead, they all began walking with purpose, some returning to cabins, others heading to gathering points. They're following evacuation procedures, Dr. Wilson observed, but there's no alarm, no announcement. They watched as passengers methodically gathered essential items, formed orderly lines, and proceeded to lifeboat stations without any signs of panic or confusion. The crew directed people with calm efficiency, checking names off lists as if this were a planned drill rather than an emergency. Can you find footage of what actually triggered this? Tom asked. Quan worked through the system, searching for any anomalies. Here, he said finally. Lower Deck E, research section. The footage showed a corridor they hadn't explored yet, one that led to that reinforced door they'd found. A group of people in lab coats were huddled outside the door, looking at something on a tablet. One woman, clearly distressed, was gesturing frantically while an older man in a suit tried to calm her. They had no audio, but the argument was evident. Suddenly, the tablet displayed something that caused everyone to step back. The woman covered her mouth in shock. The man in the suit made a call on a satellite phone, his expression grim. Minutes later, the strange synchronized pause happened, followed by the orderly evacuation. Whatever they discovered in that research area triggered all this, Tom said. We need to get through that door. I brought plasma cutters, Dr. Wilson said. If there's no other way in, we can breach it. First, let's see if there's more footage of the research section before the evacuation, Tom suggested. Maybe we can figure out what they were doing there. Quan scrolled back through days of footage, occasionally stopping to show glimpses of activity. Scientists in protective gear entering and exiting the secured area, equipment being delivered. Once, a large container being transported under heavy security. Wait, Dr. Hancock said suddenly. Go back to that last bit. Quan rewound the footage. The container was cylindrical, made of what looked like reinforced glass or transparent material. Inside was something dark that seemed to shift slightly as they moved it. Can you enhance that? Dr. Hancock asked. Quan tried, but the image quality had its limits. "Best I can do," he said, zooming in on the container. The dark shape inside remained unclear, something organic that didn't maintain a consistent form. "That's what they found," Tom said quietly. "Something from the deep ocean based on the project name, Abyssal." "There's more," Quan said, bringing up another file he'd discovered. "Ship's log backups, including some entries that aren't in the physical logbook." The digital entries painted a disturbing picture. The Aurora Star had been secretly converted for a research expedition funded by a private consortium. The cruise was a cover story. While passengers enjoyed their vacation on the upper decks, a team of scientists in the modified lower levels was studying something retrieved from an ocean trench. The final entries were increasingly frantic, describing anomalous cognitive effects among the research team. Memory gaps, shared dreams, researchers independently drawing the same strange symbols. Then a reference to breach containment protocols, followed by the implementation of Protocol Omega, the complete evacuation and isolation of the ship. "So they found something in the ocean that started affecting their minds," Officer Ramirez summarized. "Then they abandoned ship in the middle of the Caribbean. But how did it end up here?" "That's still the biggest mystery," Tom agreed. "Let's check the evacuation footage again. Maybe there's something we missed." They watched the orderly departure from multiple angles. All 16 lifeboats were launched without incident, each filled to capacity with crew and passengers. The last to leave was the captain, following maritime tradition. "Freeze there," Tom said, pointing to the screen. As the captain prepared to board the final lifeboat, he looked back at the ship with an expression not of fear, but of sadness. Then he pulled something from his pocket, a small device with a single button. "That's not standard ship equipment," Dr. Wilson said. In the footage, the captain pressed the button, then boarded the lifeboat. The camera continued recording as the boats moved away, growing smaller on the horizon. "So what happened next, Doctor?" Hancock asked. Quan fast-forwarded through hours of footage showing the empty ship floating peacefully. "Nothing for a while, and then..." He stopped as the image on every camera suddenly distorted, warping strangely before going black. "Power failure?" Officer Ramirez suggested. "No," Quan said, pointing to the timestamp that continued running. "The system kept recording, just no image for about 16 hours. When the cameras came back online, the view had completely changed. Instead of open ocean, the ship was surrounded by dense jungle canopy. Similar concept, but more controlled. The theory suggests that certain energy patterns could temporarily fold space, connecting two distant points." "That's science fiction," Officer Ramirez scoffed. "So is everything else we've seen," Tom reminded him. Dr. Hancock had grown noticeably pale. "The organism is gone from the tank, but where did they move it?" The question hung heavy in the air. Tom felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the implications. They wouldn't have taken it with them. The whole point was isolation. "It must still be somewhere on the ship," Dr. Wilson concluded. Officer Ramirez instinctively rested his hand on his weapon. "We need to find it." Quan had continued digging through the files. "There's a sub-level," he said suddenly. "Below this one. Accessible only through that emergency lift." He pointed to what looked like a service elevator at the far end of the lab. As they approached the elevator, Tom noticed something unsettling. Small markings had been etched into the metal surrounding the call button, intricate patterns that seemed vaguely familiar, though he couldn't place why. "Wait," Dr. Hancock said, grabbing his arm before he could press the button. "Look at the journal entries again, the later ones." Tom retrieved the research journal he'd been reading. The final entries showed hand-drawn versions of the exact same patterns now etched around the elevator button. The researchers were drawing these compulsively in the later stages, he said. Before they realized they were being influenced, an uncomfortable silence fell over the group as they all recognized the implication. The patterns had been carved after the evacuation, which meant someone stayed behind, Officer Ramirez stated flatly, or came back. The elevator suddenly hummed to life, its indicator showing it was ascending from the sub-level. No one had called it. "We need to leave," Dr. Hancock said urgently. "Now." They backed away from the elevator, moving toward the lab entrance. Tom noticed that Quan wasn't following. He stood motionless, staring at the elevator doors with an odd expression. "Quan," Tom called. "We're leaving. Do you hear that?" Quan asked softly, tilting his head slightly. "It's beautiful." Tom exchanged alarmed glances with the others. "No one else heard anything." "There's nothing, Quan," Dr. Wilson said firmly. "It's affecting you already. We need to go." Quan turned to them, his eyes unnaturally bright. "But don't you want to know? Don't you want to understand what they found? What they learned? It's right there, waiting to share everything with us." The elevator chimed as it reached their level. "Get him out of here," Tom ordered, and Officer Ramirez grabbed Quan's arm, pulling him back toward the entrance. Quan struggled, suddenly frantic. "No, you don't understand. It knows things about the universe, about reality itself. We can't just leave it here." As they dragged Quan back through the decontamination chamber, Tom looked back to see the elevator doors opening slowly. From his angle, he couldn't see inside, but a faint blue luminescence spilled out into the lab, casting long shadows. They managed to get through the reinforced door, which sealed automatically behind them. Quan's resistance ceased almost immediately once they were back in the corridor, as if whatever influence had gripped him couldn't extend beyond the lab's boundaries. I don't know what happened," he stammered, looking disoriented and frightened. There was a voice, or not really a voice, more like thoughts that weren't mine. "We need to get off this ship," Dr. Hancock insisted. "Whatever is down there, the isolation protocols are failing." "It's active again." As if confirming her assessment, the lights in the corridor flickered, and a low vibration ran through the metal floor beneath their feet. "The engines," Dr. Wilson said, looking alarmed. "They're powering up." "That's impossible without a full engineering crew." A ship-wide announcement system that had been silent during all their previous visits suddenly crackled to life. What came through wasn't a voice but a series of tones, rising and falling in patterns that made Tom's skin crawl. Patterns that somehow seemed meaningful, as if he almost understood what they were trying to communicate. "Don't listen," Dr. Hancock warned, covering her ears. "That's how it starts." They ran through the corridors, heading for the upper decks and their exit point. As they climbed, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that the ship itself was waking up around them. Systems coming online, lights brightening, as if the massive vessel were a body stirring from long hibernation. And somewhere deep below, something ancient and patient was finally ready to emerge.